Hi, everybody, near and far. Welcome via YouTube to our Living Writers Imitation Series. We are joined by some wonderful San Diego State MFA students. We want to thank everyone for their contributions and discussions in English 579 this semester as we discuss some amazing work with passion and thoughtfulness each week. We also want to thank our fearless leader, Megan Marshall, for hosting engaging lectures and fantastic live events this semester. Lastly, we especially want to thank the authors who visited us in Living Writers this fall. It is with the utmost admiration that we imitate and reflect upon your work. For our project, we'll be imitating some of our favorite authors' works and discussing the inspiration we drew from these living writers. Without further ado, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our first writer, Arnesha Royston. Arnesha is a second-year MFA student studying poetry. Arnesha is interested in contemporary poetry and repurposing traditional poetic forms. Arnesha will be imitating Alan Cesaro's poem, Broken Sestina as Soundscape. She was particularly taken with his choice to break form and repurpose it to fit his content. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Arnesha.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight and to share an imitation of a poem I did from Alan Cesaro's chapbook poet, Piñata Theory. I'm super excited to share this because I think it's something very special about repurposing traditional poetic forms to fit into contemporary poetry and to fit the narratives that authors and poets want to share. So I'm super excited to share that poem with you today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and read this poem. So the poem is entitled On Repeat after Alan Cesaro's Broken Sestina as Soundscape. On repeat. I don't have a lot of poems about my father or the man I imagine him to be, just stories about him and my mother together. Happy couples live apart sometimes. There's an old photo of them in an album tucked inside of a cabinet next to old rags. I am scared of getting older, crooked smiling like my father. I don't want to be damaged goods like a scratched album on a record player. Record players tell stories on repeat. My father repeats himself sometimes, like a scratched record trying to pull himself together. I don't ever remember him being together. He lies, and I grew older, a wise woman, though sometimes wise women still marry men like their fathers. I am not certain of my father, only the stories of absence, loud, like a scratched album on repeat. I don't have a lot of poems about or the man I imagine him to be, just lies about him and my mother apart. I don't remember them ever living together. An old photo of them sits in an album, crumpled inside of old. I am getting older without a. Sometimes time feels like a scratched album on repeat. These are the stories and how they loop. Thank you so much. That was my imitation of Alan Cesaro's Sestina from his poem. Yeah, I think it's just something beautiful about taking a traditional poetic form to fit into your narrative and whatever that may be. And Cesaro does it beautifully. And I hope that my poem can kind of imitate and mimic what he does there. Without further ado, I would like to move on to our next author that is going to share some work with you all tonight. So I would like to introduce Nigel. Nigel has spent his childhood growing up in the Midwest, Pacific Northwest, Northern California, and ultimately Southern California, where he resides today. His writing reflects these places and the people he's met along the way. As a current MFA student at SDSU, Nigel is interested in both prose and poetry. Nigel tonight will be imitating Eric Nguyen's Things We Lost in the Water, as he was inspired by Nguyen's mystery of point of view and internal. Let's all please give a warm welcome to Nigel. Thank you.
Wow, Arnesha, that was so wonderful. Really, really inspiring and tough to follow. But yeah, so for my imitation, I'm going to be going off of Eric Nguyen's Things We Lost to Water. One of the things that I love about him as a writer is he just has such a strong grasp on POV. Every character is handled with such intricacy and detail, and he really has just full control over their movements, feelings, sensations, and desires. And so I wrote a scene based off one of my favorite scenes in Things We Lost to Water, when Howie is teaching Ben how to swim. In this scene, Ben and Howie kiss, but there is such a vulnerability to Ben that I think Nguyen portrays extremely well, as well as like layering in repetition and internal thought to really just create a very memorable scene. So with that, I'll read my imitation. When October began, Pelly told Dean he wanted to dive for lobster, just like they had when they were kids. Clawing at the cold water, the two boys raced towards the orange buoys. Dean got there first, or at least he would have if Pelly hadn't grabbed the leg rope fastened to his surfboard. Dean looked towards the beach and could make out Sadie's silhouette across the sand as he tied his board to the cables of a lobster trap. The boys had stolen lobster only a few times before when they were much younger. As far as Dean could recall, they were never very good at it. The water wasn't too deep, maybe 30 feet, but it was hard for Dean to see without a light. I don't know, Pell. Dean fought to keep still out in the deep current. We don't even know if anything's down there. You know, Pelly said. Lobster don't float. He spit some salt water in Dean's direction. Pelly dove down first. Dean followed. His face quickly tightened as the water changed in thickness and temperature. Dean thought it had to be at least in the 40s once he managed to get himself 10 feet deep. Still, he kept diving, clawing, following the lobster cable like a miner down a dark, lightless shaft. Eventually, he made it to the cage. Pelly was there ahead of him. He was pulling at the lobster, which Dean noticed were huddled together creepily and looking back at him with directionless yellow eyes. He managed to pull a few out of the trap's rusty bars and snapped a tail in the process. He felt a kick in his chest, this awful burning sensation, and one of Dean's lobsters broke free as his cold hand struggled to grip the cable. He thought it would swim, but it didn't. It was dumb and probably scared. He pushed off the cable to grab it, and it was just floating there, like a dumb bug, he thought. He took it back and pivoted it for the cable. The swell had pushed him. There was nothing to grab onto. No cable, no Pelly, just black water. Purple dots formed in the corner of his eyes. His chest was no longer burning, and he knew from what his father had told him about diving, this was a bad thing. Without the cable, Dean had nothing to climb up. So he floated like an astronaut, lost in space. His legs kicked with little real direction. Or maybe they weren't kicking at all. He saw himself from above the surface. He was a boy in the water. He held the lobster close as the purple dots in his eyes pulsated and grew bigger. He was a boy in the water, he thought, just as he had been before, like he had never been before. Just a dumb boy floating in the water. A boy, dumb, in the water. No bigger, no smaller. Just a boy floating in the water. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really, really a pleasure to imitate Eric Nguyen. Very excited to introduce our next author, Michelle Delong. Michelle is a first-year MFA fiction student. She will be imitating Santiani Dasgupta's Women Who Misbehave because she was inspired by the idea of female protagonists who subvert gender forms in unexpected ways and are neither hero nor villain. The following excerpt is the beginning of what will be a full piece in a collection of short stories. Please give a warm welcome to Michelle.
Hi, thank you, Nigel. Your piece was so amazing. I love how you imitated that very specific scene, but made it your own. It was very cool. So thank you. Yeah, so I was very inspired by Sayantani Dasgupta's whole collection. And this imitation is not really based on a particular scene or even a particular story. It's more just the through line that Sayantani had, which was these female protagonists that kind of are unexpected and fall into this kind of gray area where they're neither good nor bad, hero nor villain. So here it is. And this is just an excerpt from it. It's a longer story, but I'm just going to read the first part. Greta was physically healthy, didn't have any credit card debt, and was the kind of woman you could take to a friend's party where she would know no one and not have to worry about her slinking outside to smoke after 20 minutes of anxious conversation. Greta didn't have any real flaws, she reminded herself, except that she kept getting stuck to things that were bad for her, things that had unforeseeable consequences. The first time Greta could remember getting stuck, really stuck into a trajectory over which she felt little control, was when she was 6 years old and performed in her first dance recital. She had worn a blue tutu, towards which she remembered feeling a considerable excitement, and taken the second position in a neat little line of ballerina buns on a community theater stage, ready to practice her plie for an auditorium of parents with video cameras. When the curtain rose and lights illuminated the red tape marks on the floor indicating where the ballerinas should stand, the little girl in front of Greta, maybe Abby was her name, froze like a deer on the highway. Greta tasted a sour, peculiar rage bubbling from her stomach up into her tiny throat at the way little Abby's meek, trembling form threatened the fantasy Greta had guarded all day. A victorious plie, perfect in the eyes of every admiring parent and every video camera, especially perfect for her mother and father. So Greta poked the frozen ballerina bun with her silver fairy wand until it wobbled to its rightful tape mark at stage left, leaving center stage open for Greta, who smiled wide and remembered her choreography perfectly. Backstage, the parent volunteers laughed heartily at Greta's miniature self-assuredness, her adorable assertiveness, a word that Greta would hear many times over the course of her life, bookended with various other adjectives and connotations. Later the same evening, after she was spanked and sent to timeout as a punishment for an untidy bedroom, Greta felt the acrid anger scorch her throat again, this time instantaneous, and she smashed one of her picture books, maybe it was Cinderella, into the soft space between her 2-year-old sister's fledgling shoulder blades. Greta was promptly spanked again, this time with a belt, and grounded from a whole month of ballet practice. And when her mother threatened to also take one of Greta's favorite toys away from her forever, Greta responded by gathering every picture book, every stuffed animal, and every curly head doll she owned, and lining them up in orderly rows in front of her parents' bedroom door. Even at 6, Greta understood that if she learned when to spit and when to swallow the vinegar that rose unbidden from the dark space behind her belly button, it terrified the people who also loved her, and that love, fear, and power could be woven together like the fine sun-bleached strands of a little girl's pigtail braid. Thank you. Yeah, so I would like to welcome our next reader, our next poet, Anna Gassaway. She is a third-year MFA student studying poetry, and she'll be imitating Nicole Seeley. She was attracted to Nicole Seeley's impeccable use of forms, and especially intrigued by her cento, which puts together lines of poetry from many different poets. Anna has taken sonnets from writers like Rafael Campo, Jacqueline Oshiro, I hope I said that right, Srila Ray, and others to create a wholly different poem. So welcome me in thanking and, well, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I would like to welcome Anna Cassaway. Thanks.
Thank you for that introduction. I was so moved by your work, and so I'm just excited to see where you go with that. This Nicole Seeley is very well read. She has like this Nicole Seeley challenge, and like where you read a book of poetry a day. So like she's definitely well read. And you can tell in her book, Ordinary Beast, how well read she is. And so she uses these forms like they're like, it's amazing. Anyway, so I tried to do a cento, and we will see. All right. Cento for lights fading. How the loss of a person grows beyond form and magnitude and time, despite our constant failure at belief. To hold the dark, I dig in the garden. I mourned again and worshiped after her. The mind is sometimes only dimly lit from that distance, as miniature and unbreakable the lights faded and the stars came. Then there is that incredible knowing and living. Is this too much to ask? That it glide my throat an open sepulcher, my tongue twitching as warm-up shot detonated my name. Women loved me like licorice. Say it moved when you moved. You, my love, my world. Now have I set my heart on, remarkably poised on a blue throat to play that old game of who gave it to whom. Must you tell everyone what you are? Out of hunger, the snow too deep to paw out shoots, the clinch of words, the hidden couplings. Slowly, the wheel of my regard moves on. Whether thoughts I felt, he noticed with no fear, a child's game, as though it named their loss, darted backwards, tightening the threads, the way we stint on any modicum of kindness. From time to time, let me hear from you. Thank you. So thank you for coming to Living Writers MFA edition. We really appreciate you and your time. And now I would like to open it up for questions.